Wyoming Territory, early spring of 1874. The wind carried the scent of pine and melting snow, and Xavier O'Connell had not planned to stop. He was riding west, away from a past he did not speak of, a worn saddle under him and nothing ahead but open sky. The trail had thinned out past the red rock hills, where the trees thickened and the map grew vague. He had not seen a soul in 3 days. Then he spotted smoke. It was thin, rising from behind a jagged outcrop, too small to be a camp of men. It was cautious. Xavier slowed his gelding. He kept his rifle across his saddle, not aimed, just ready. After another 100 yards, he heard the faint cry of a child. His brow tightened. Not a trap, not the sound of bandits or scouts, just a boy's cry, raw, tired. He dismounted and tied his horse in the brush. Quiet steps brought him closer to a hollow in the rocks where the smoke curled from a crude fire pit. A woman stood with a rifle in her hands, feet planted wide, body blocking 2 small children behind her. The girl, no older than 6, clutched her brother, who looked barely 3. They stared up at Xavier with wide, dirt-streaked faces. "Do not move," the woman said. Xavier raised both hands slowly, his own rifle left leaning against a pine. "I am not here to hurt you," he said, voice even. "Saw the smoke, heard the boy, thought you might need help." She kept the rifle trained on him. Her hands were steady, her eyes, too sharp, tired, and guarded as hell. "What do you want?" "Nothing," he said. "Name is Xavier O'Connell. I am passing through, headed west." "That is all." The girl behind her whimpered, and the woman glanced back just long enough for Xavier to see the strain in her face. She was young, maybe 23, with dark hair pulled into a braid, a coat 2 sizes too big on her frame, and boots worn nearly through at the soles. "I do not trust men," she said. "Fair." Xavier nodded. Silence stretched. He could have walked away, should have. But those kids were pale and hungry looking, and the woman's hands were trembling now from more than cold. She was near the end of her strength. "I am not staying," he said carefully. "But I have food in my saddlebag. Dried meat, biscuits, some coffee." Her eyes flicked toward the brush. "You alone?" "Yes." She hesitated, then nodded once. "Leave the food there. Then go." He did as she asked, setting down the small bundle, then backing away. He did not turn his back until he had mounted again. Xavier rode half a mile before he stopped. He sat in the saddle, listening to the wind. He should have kept going. But there had been something in the way the little boy clung to her leg, something in the woman's voice, not fear, but stubborn, breaking strength. He turned back. By the time he reached the hollow again, the fire was out. The children were huddled under a threadbare blanket, and the woman was sitting on a log, rifle across her knees. "I told you to go," she said. "You did," Xavier said. "But I reckon you and those kids are not going to last long out here alone. They are not mine. I am watching over them." Xavier stepped closer, slow. She did not raise the rifle this time. "Where are their parents?" "Gone," she said. "Dead or gone? I do not know." He glanced down at the children. The girl was watching him, her thumb in her mouth. "You got a name?" he asked. She hesitated, then said, "Adeline Granger." "All right, Miss Granger. I will not stay where I am not welcome. But I can build a better fire. You got no shelter worth the name, and those kids need more than dried meat." Tired silence again. The kind that comes from too many days without sleep. Finally, she said, "If you try anything, I will shoot you." "Fair," Xavier said again. He unsaddled his horse and set to work. By nightfall, he had a tent up from his canvas sheet, enough to break the wind. The kids had eaten and were curled by the fire under his spare coat. Adeline had not put down her rifle, but she had taken a few bites of the beans he cooked and allowed him to tend the fire. "You are good with them," he said quietly, nodding toward the children. "They were left behind when the wagon train was attacked. I found them hiding in the brush. I could not leave them." Her voice cracked just slightly. She turned away, blinking fast. I did not ask for this. I was on my way to Cheyenne to work as a seamstress. I have no family left. I thought I might start over. Xavier looked at her, really looked. She was not made for the wild. Her hands were scraped, her clothes threadbare, but she had kept those kids alive. That took grit. You did more than most would. She shrugged. It is not enough. He did not argue. Just added more wood to the fire and sat beside it in silence. When the wind picked up, Adeline drew the children closer. Their names are Thalia and Tobias, she said. They are not blood, but they are mine now. Xavier nodded. The next morning brought sleet and wind. Xavier repaired the lean-to, reinforced it with pine boughs, and hunted a rabbit. Adeline watched him, wary but quiet. The kids began to follow him with their eyes, and by the third day, Tobias raised his arms to be held. You are good with him, Adeline said, surprised. My sister had twins. I helped raise them. That was a long time ago. She stared at him for a moment, then said softly, Why are you really out here? Xavier stirred the fire. Looking for somewhere I do not have to outrun myself. She said nothing, but her fingers relaxed on the rifle. By the end of the week, Xavier had stopped pretending he was leaving. He built a proper shelter and taught Thalia how to gather firewood without getting lost. Adeline began to smile, more small, tired smiles, but real. One night, as the children slept and the fire crackled low, Adeline said, I did not expect you to stay. I did not mean to, he said. She looked at him. Why did you? He met her eyes. Because you were out here alone, guarding 2 children like your life depended on it. And I saw more strength in that than I have in any man I ever rode with. She blinked, startled. I do not know what this is yet, he added. But I know I want to stay. Adeline's voice was quiet. It has been a long time since anyone wanted to stay. Xavier reached across the fire and took her hand. I am not going anywhere, he said. She did not pull away. By the second week, the snow peeled back from the roots of the trees, and the creek started running louder with meltwater. The wind still bit, but the light had changed, longer days, with the smell of thawing earth stirring beneath the pine needles. Xavier had added a second lean to off the first, enough to keep the wind off both the fire and the sleeping children. Thalia had taken to trailing behind him whenever he fetched water or sawed wood, asking questions in a whisper as though afraid too much noise might wake what was left of winter. Adeline didn't stop her. She kept close, always working, patching the children's clothes, boiling pine bark to keep the cough from creeping back into Tobias's chest, shaking out the blanket each morning like she expected something worse than cold to have settled in overnight. One afternoon, Xavier came back from checking the perimeter to find Adeline kneeling by the fire, scraping a cracked comb through her long braid. She'd let it down to dry, and it hung like a wet rope over her shoulder. You ever trap before? He asked, setting his rifle down near the tent. She didn't glance up. I've dressed a rabbit. Never set one. I'll show you. He crouched near the fire, warming his fingertips. We'll need more food if we stay through the thaw. She turned to him slowly, the comb still in her hand. You think we'll still be here come June? He looked at her, steady. I do. She didn't answer right away. Just went back to working the comb through the worst of the tangles. I used to think I'd end up in a town with neighbors, a shop, a church. I never pictured this. You want to leave? He asked. I don't know. She set the comb down. Sometimes I think I'm not meant for the wild. He shifted his weight, resting his elbows on his knees. You're holding up better than most I've known. Town won't make it easier. Just different. She reached for Tobias, who had begun to stir, and gathered him into her lap. His cheek pressed against her shoulder, and he was asleep again in less than a minute. I don't mean to complain, she said softly. Some mornings I wake up and I forget where I am. Then I see them. And I remember. Xavier nodded once. I've lived like that. She looked at him closely. Where did you sleep before this? Wherever I stopped riding. Did you ever have someone waiting? He shook his head. Not for long. I wasn't much good at staying. that made her quiet again. The fire cracked between them and the sound of the creak came faintly through the trees. Why now? Her voice was quiet. He didn't pretend not to understand. Because I don't want to ride past the first thing that's ever felt like a reason to stop. She held his gaze for a long moment. Then she looked down at Tobias, brushing a bit of ash from his brow with the edge of her sleeve. That night, Xavier taught Thalia how to notch branches for snares. Her hands were clumsy, but her eyes sharp, and by dusk she'd made 2 workable loops. As she curled beneath the blanket beside her brother, she whispered, "Can I show Mama tomorrow?" Xavier glanced toward Adeline, who was standing at the edge of the trees, her arms crossed against the chill. "Yeah," he said. "You show her first thing." When the sky turned deep blue and the children were asleep, Adeline joined him by the fire. She didn't sit, just stood with her hands wrapped around a tin cup of warm water. "Thalia called me Mama," she said. "She will again. I don't know if I can be what they need. You already are. I didn't birth them. Doesn't change what they see when they're afraid. Or who they run to." She lowered herself to the log across from him. "You speak like you've known loss." He didn't answer right away. Stared into the flame until it blurred. "I was 14 when my father was shot over a debt he didn't owe. My mother lasted another year. After that, I rode with a man who made his money carrying messages through war zones. I did that for a spell. Then I didn't. Been drifting since." Adeline's fingers tightened around the cup. "You don't seem like a man without a place." "I wasn't until now." Wind rustled the boughs above them. A nightbird called once, then went quiet. "You're not the kind of man I thought I'd trust," she said at last. "But I do." He met her eyes. "And you're not the kind of woman I thought I'd find." She stood slowly and crossed the small space between them. Sat beside him on the log, their shoulders not touching, but close enough that the warmth passed between them. "I'm not ready for promises," she said. "I'm not asking for one. But I don't want you to leave." "I won't." She let out a long breath and leaned her head lightly against his shoulder. He didn't move, didn't speak. Just let her settle and watched the fire burn low as the stars thinned across the sky. By mid-April, the last frost had lifted. Mud clung to their boots, and the creek ran high enough to carry broken branches downstream in a steady, restless hush. The world was turning green again slowly, like a body waking after too long on the ground. Xavier had taken to keeping his rifle closer these days. Not from fear, but habit. The thaw meant movement: trappers, drifters, soldiers. Strangers. None had passed near yet, but the air had shifted. Adeline felt it too. She'd begun to keep her shoes by the bedroll instead of the fire, and she'd moved the children's sleeping place deeper into the lean-to where morning light didn't touch them so quickly. Thalia had asked why, and Adeline had only said, "It's warmer there." One afternoon, while Thalia napped with her arms around Tobias, Xavier returned from checking the snares with a fresh rabbit and a broken strap. Adeline was kneeling by the creek, washing the sleeve of her dress where Tobias had spilled broth. Her hair was pinned up for once, strands loose at her temples from the damp. Xavier crouched beside her and held out the rabbit. "Caught near the south bend," he said. "Snare gave out, though. I'll need to braid new cord." She nodded without looking up. "You'll show me how?" "If you want." "I do." He laid the rabbit on a flat stone and rinsed his hands in the current. "I've been thinking," she said after a moment, "about Cheyenne." He kept his hands in the water. "Still planning to go?" "I don't know. I used to think the only safety was behind doors with locks. But the more I think on it, the more I remember what towns can take from a woman who's got no man beside her." He said nothing, but his shoulders eased. "There's a spot east of here," she went on. "I saw it when I first came through. Flat ground, not too far from the creek. Wouldn't take much to clear space for planting." He looked up. "You thinking of staying?" She met his eyes. "I'm thinking of building." He wiped his hands on his trousers. "You'd need help putting up a cabin." "I would," she said. "And you'd need something to do with all that cord." He gave a short nod. "We'd need more tools. Axe, saw, nails. And a mule," she added, "if we're going to haul anything heavier than firewood." He leaned back on his heels, watching the way the sun touched her cheekbone. That's a lot of weight to pull. I know, she said. But I want something solid. For them. For me. She paused. For us. It was the first time she'd said it like that. Xavier stood and offered her his hand. She took it, rising slowly, water dripping from her fingers. We'll need to ride into Laramie, he said. Could take 3 days round trip. I'd go alone, but I'm coming, she said. I won't leave the children, and you shouldn't go alone. Thalia's voice called faintly from the shelter. Adeline turned, brushing her hand down her skirt. They'll need coats, she said. And boots that fit. I'll trade for what we can't find. She nodded once. We'll ride at first light. They left the next morning with Tobias bundled against Xavier's chest and Thalia riding before Adeline. The horses moved slow, careful over soft ground, and Xavier kept one hand near his rifle, though the trail was quiet. They reached Laramie by dusk on the second day. The town was busier than Xavier remembered, freight wagons crowding narrow streets, smoke rising in hard lines from chimneys, men shouting over the clang of iron and hooves. Adeline pulled the children close as they walked toward the general store, her eyes scanning every face. Inside, the clerk took one look at Xavier's trail-worn coat and began to name prices higher than fair. Xavier said nothing, just laid the rabbit skins across the counter. Then the silver ring he'd worn on a leather cord since boyhood. The clerk hesitated, then nodded. They left with a bolt of canvas, a sack of seed, small boots, and a used saw with a cracked handle. No mule, but Xavier had a plan for that. They slept that night in the woods outside town, fire low, horses tied close. Adeline didn't sleep much. Neither did he. She watched the sky lighten behind the trees, then whispered, "You ever think about what comes after all this?" He turned toward her. "I used to think I didn't have one. And now?" He reached across the space between them and brushed her knuckles with his thumb. "Now I wonder what color you'll paint the door." That brought a quiet sound from her, half breath, half laugh. "I was thinking green," she said. He nodded. "Green's good." They rode slow on the way back, trail heavy with supplies. Tobias slept most of the time, and Thalia counted birds aloud until her voice gave out. Adeline's posture stayed straight, but Xavier could see the way her muscles fought the saddle. He dismounted at the edge of the clearing and reached up to lift her down. She didn't resist. They stood together in the soft mud, horses behind them and the faint outline of their lean to just visible beneath the trees. "This is where it begins," she said. He looked at her, truly looked. It already has. The clearing east of the creek had to be cleared by hand, and the work stretched into weeks. Xavier and Adeline rose before first light each morning, easing out from under the canvas while the children still slept. He felled trees with the saw they'd traded for, the rhythm of blade biting with steady and patient. She hauled branches and stripped bark until her palms blistered. They worked without many words, but always in step, like two parts of the same effort, moving towards something neither had named aloud. By the third week, the space was wide enough to stake a foundation. Xavier dug post holes while Adeline boiled pine resin to seal the joints. Thalia handed nails one by one with serious care, and Tobias toddled behind her, collecting stones and offering them like treasure. That evening, as dusk settled and smoke lifted from their cook fire, Adeline stood beside the notched beams they'd raised and looked out past the tree-line. "My father used to say you don't build a house with your hands. You build it with what you carry when you're alone." Xavier leaned on the axe handle, watching her. "He was a preacher? A blacksmith?" She smiled faintly. Couldn't read a word, but he had a way of making silence mean something. Xavier stepped closer, quiet on the damp grass. "You sound like you miss him." "I do. He died the spring I turned 17. I buried him behind the forge and left the same week." He waited. "I thought if I kept moving, I wouldn't have to feel the weight of it. Then I kept moving so long I forgot what it meant to stop." He nodded once. "You know, I never told you what my sister's name was." She turned to him. "May," he said. "She was older by 2 years. Married a man who drank himself dumb, but she made it work. Had 3 girls. I stayed with her when I could. Then one winter there was diphtheria in the valley. Took the youngest first, then the others. May never recovered. She died the winter after." Adeline didn't speak, but she reached for his hand, her fingers rough from rope and bark. He let her take it. They stood like that until the stars came out. Later that night, after the children were asleep and the fire had gone low, Xavier turned toward her beneath the canvas. "You ever think about what you'd be doing if things had gone different?" Adeline brushed a bit of hair from her brow. "I'd be sewing dresses in Cheyenne. Living in a room above a bakery, maybe. Drinking tea instead of pine bark." He smiled, slow and rare. "I'd be riding cattle, probably. Sleeping in a bunkhouse. Talking to horses more than people." She reached out and laid a hand on his chest. "Would you miss this?" He covered her hand with his. "Every damn day." She exhaled, long and slow. "I don't want this to be borrowed." "It's not." "I mean it," she whispered. "I don't want to wake one morning and find you gone." "You won't." "You're sure?" He shifted, drawing her closer. "I've never been more certain of anything." She rested her forehead against him, and they lay that way for a long time, listening to the wind move through the trees. By the next morning, the children had begun calling the new place the house. Thalia asked when the roof would be done, and Tobias had taken to hiding his wooden horse under the floor planks. Xavier spent the afternoon splitting shingles while Adeline sorted seed by hand, her back against the log wall. She hummed something low and tuneless, not for anyone but herself. When the sun dipped behind the ridge and the beams cast long shadows across the grass, Xavier laid the last shingle and climbed down from the roof. He wiped his forehead with his sleeve and found Adeline watching him. "You look like you've done this before," she said. "First time," he admitted. She tilted her head. "Could have fooled me." He crossed the clearing and took her hand. "We're going to fill this place with something good." She didn't let go. "We already are." That night, they sat on the threshold of their half-built home, the children asleep behind them, the stars sharp above. Adeline leaned against his shoulder, and he wrapped an arm around her waist. Neither spoke. They didn't need to. The cabin was finished by early May. The walls held against the wind, the roof didn't leak when the first heavy rains came, and the hearth drew smoke cleanly. Built with their own hands, it stood low and strong beside the creek, the scent of fresh-cut pine still clinging to the beams. Inside, the corners were neat, the shelves hand-hewn, and the floor swept each morning by Thalia, who took the task as seriously as a soldier on watch. Adeline stood in the doorway, her apron damp from scrubbing, watching Tobias toddle after a frog near the edge of the clearing. The grass was higher now, dotted with wildflowers, and the air hung warm and still. She tucked a strand of loose hair behind her ear, her fingers roughened and familiar with work they hadn't known just months ago. Xavier was in the garden behind the house, bent over a row of sprouting beans. His shirt clung to his back, and his hat shaded his face as he eased a crooked stake into the soil. When he straightened, he caught her watching and raised a hand. She nodded, then stepped down into the yard and crossed to join him. "How deep's the well now?" she asked, kneeling to help with the stakes. "Shovel hits gravel around shoulder height. Water comes up clean." She passed him a twine knot. "We'll need to lay stone round the edge. I'll haul some from the creek tomorrow." He tied off the string, then sat back on his heels, wiping his palms on his trousers. "Thalia says she wants a swing," she said, glancing toward the wide-limbed cottonwood at the edge of the clearing. "She tell you where it ought to hang?" She pointed. "Twice." Xavier grinned faintly. "Then I'd better see to it." Adeline leaned back beside him, resting her weight on one arm. "You ever think how unlikely this all is?" He didn't answer right away. A breeze stirred the young corn shoots, and a hawk circled high above, silent. "I used to think peace was something people got after they'd paid for every mistake," he said. "Now I think maybe it's something you build, slow, with your hands and your choices. Like this." She turned toward him. "You've changed. So have you." She looked down at the dirt beneath her nails and the calluses on her knuckles. "I don't miss who I was before." He reached over and took her wrist gently. "Neither do I." They stayed like that for a moment, their shadows stretching long through the garden rows. Then she rose and brushed her skirt clean. "I'll see to supper. Come in before the light fades." Inside, the fire crackled low in the hearth and the smell of salt pork and sage drifted into the corners. Tobias curled up with his wooden horse against the wall and Thalia sat cross-legged on her pallet, arranging her stones into neat circles. Xavier entered, ducking his head through the doorway and set down the sack of beans he'd brought in from the field. He crossed the room and picked Tobias up, settling him gently into the cradle Adeline had carved from pine. "You ever think about putting your name to this land?" she asked, ladling stew into the bowls. He took one and passed it to Thalia. "I've thought about it. There's a man in Elk Hollow. Files claims for settlers. He's fair." He watched her closely. "You want to make it official?" She set down the ladle and met his gaze. "I want what we've built to last." He nodded once. "Then we'll go after the planting's done." After supper, they sat on the porch, the children asleep, the stars crowding the sky. Adeline leaned into Xavier's side, her head resting just above his heart. "I used to think love was something that found you," she said. "Now I think it's something you grow, the way you do a garden. With care." He didn't speak, just reached for her hand and held it. She let her eyes close. "I love you, Xavier." He turned to her, voice low and steady. "I love you, Adeline. I've loved you since the day you stood between me and those children with your rifle like the world depended on it." She laughed softly, but her throat tightened. "I didn't know you'd stay. I didn't know I could," he said. "But you gave me a place to become someone worth staying." She pulled him down to kiss her, slow and certain, and he answered without hesitation. The night held them, quiet and wide. They married in late summer, under the cottonwood where the swing now hung. Thalia braided wildflowers into Adeline's hair, and Xavier carved a ring from riverstone and bone. The ceremony was small, just the four of them and the wind in the branches. They signed their names to the land a month later, after the first frost. The papers sat in a drawer by the hearth, tucked between seed catalogs and Tobias's drawing of a horse with 6 legs. The cabin stayed warm through winter. The harvest was modest but enough. They dried apples, smoked meat, and patched the roof before the snow came. Adeline sewed curtains from flour sacks. Xavier made a sled from spare boards. Thalia learned her letters. Tobias spoke his first full sentence. "Mama, swing now." By the following spring, Adeline stood in the doorway again, her apron tied snug around her waist, her hand resting over the curve of her belly. Xavier was planting onions. Thalia ran barefoot through the new grass, and Tobias chased her, laughing. Adeline smiled, then stepped down into the light. There was nothing missing, nothing waiting. The cabin, the children, the man, every piece had been earned and held. And it was enough, forever.